Welcome, LifeBlood. This is George G, and the time is right. Welcome to today's guest, strong and powerful James Malley. James, are you ready to do this?
I am so ready, George.
All right, let's go. James is the co-founder and CEO of Paccurate. They are the only patented cartonization solution that optimizes for transportation costs directly, so you can have the right boxes and control how they are packed. James, tell us a little about your personal life, some more about your work, and why you do what you do.
Sure. So I've been in logistics tech since 2009, mostly on a freelance basis in the beginning years, kind of working on the projects that nobody else wanted to deal with. My now co-founder and I kind of carved out this niche of taking, I wouldn't say necessarily the hardest projects, but definitely the most annoying ones. And so we got kind of burnt out of that after a few years. And it was around that time that we were looking around for something that we could own. It'd be our IP. And it just so happened to be when FedEx and UPS started penalizing shippers, e-commerce and otherwise, for poorly packed boxes. And so, cartonization is kind of the term for determining what box to use for any given shipment. And it's not a new concept, but we thought we could do a better job than some of the legacy solutions out there. And that's why we started Paccurate.
Nice. So 2009, you've been at it. How did you get into that in the first place? Just a passion for logistics, James?
Oh man, supply chain's really funny because like everybody kind of falls into it and then they just stick there and they don't know why and they can't explain why they become like huge supply chain nerds after doing a short amount of time. But I actually went to theater school for college, and by the time I graduated, realized that all the websites that I had been making for theater companies for beer money, I enjoyed that a whole lot more. And then so I got in touch with Pat, and who I actually went to high school with, and we started just working on freelance projects. And then, once you kind of get pulled into one supply chain tech project, suddenly, that's your market, because everybody knows everybody, and we just kept getting recommended to other kind of vendors there. So that's kind of how we found our way in. But I don't think or I'll speak for myself only, not Pat, but I don't think I really found my passion for the space or our approach to it today until pretty late. It was kind of just a job for the first years.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate that. I think a lot of people can identify with that. So I'm sure if you are a problem solving kind of a person that you're in the right space. I mean, I know very little about it, but it seems like there's bottlenecks and mistakes and balls that are dropped at every step of logistics.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fantastically complicated. It's one of the thing that makes well, there's a couple side effects of this. One is like supply chain people have a lot of pride in their supply chain knowledge.
Hmm.
And so you kind of have to be respectful of like very seasoned supply chain operators because they have a pretty firm grasp on the complexities. But the other kind of side effect is that it's actually, pretty fertile ground for disruption, because there's so many little niches you can improve. That I mean, it's almost endless in terms of opportunities for entrepreneurs, regardless of how much experience you have in supply chain.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes sense. So you mentioned, I don't remember the date that you said, but there was a time where these big shippers, these legacy shipping companies started charging more for poorly packed boxes. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure, I think this was around 2016, 2017. They may have started a little earlier, but this is when they kind of cranked up the heat. They have basically historically FedEx and UPS and the other carriers have always charged mostly just based on weight, and
Mhm.
maybe there'd be an oversized charge if you're trying to ship a piano or something. But they realize like this isn't really working. We're shipping too many boxes with a tiny thing jangling around in the bottom, and it's taking way more trucks than we need, and there's serious capacity issues with that. And so rather than say, okay, we're switching to do a combination of dimensions and weight, they came up with a kind of a word, dimensional weight. So it basically gave them the option to charge for either the actual weight or this kind of fake weight that incorporated the cubic volume. So without going too down the rabbit hole, that's kind of how they went about it. And suddenly, all these shippers that didn't really take packing too seriously were getting absolutely hammered. Margins are, overnight almost going away. And so, that's kind of why we got interested, because we had developed these relationships with shippers, and they said, I tried the cartonization feature in my warehouse software, or, we tried to build our own. It's just too hard. It's a weirdly deep problem figuring out how to put things in boxes. Can you build something? And so we just said, why not? And that's how we kind of got into it.
Got it. All right. So maybe walk me through a case study or two. So I've got this widget. I've got, a storefront with a big warehouse in the back, and I'm shipping stuff all over the place.
What does it look like? Yeah. So in practice, the packers, it's usually a packer at a pack station in a distribution center. Occasionally it'll be in stores if they're shipping from their stores. But typically there's not much in the way of direction for those operators. It's just, you have to get all these orders out the door and onto the truck by the end of the day, or else. There's always been like a huge emphasis on speed, especially, during the pandemic when e-commerce was going crazy. But with this kind of these new fees and rising costs, and speaking of the pandemic, all the other costs all of a sudden shot up, like the cost of the actual cardboard, the fill material, transportation, labor, all these things. So suddenly this sort of underappreciated step in fulfillment, because most of the robotics and really whiz bang stuff innovations are happening elsewhere in the warehouse. This packing step suddenly became very important. And so what we do is we generate packing instructions with a 3D visual of how a shipment should be packed into a box or boxes. And we show it on the screen, and they pack it up and scan it and send it off.
And you just figured out a computer program or what, based on the size of the
Yeah,
box and the thing?
yeah. So the category of math problem is called bin packing. And 3D bin packing is not even that new of a concept. You can find examples in like MIT thesis papers, or there's like a really great Air Force white paper about it actually. But when you apply it to a production kind of parcel shipping scenario, theory kind of wilts in front of practice. So the engine that we had to build, having some awareness about what actually goes on in the warehouse and what kind of costs are there to be dealt with, it's more of kind of a cost reconciliation engine. So, being able to do like a 3D Tetris that plays itself is kind of the baseline. But then you have to decide, are these items fragile? Can a battery be put in a box with, oatmeal or whatever it is? And then, FedEx and UPS have all these sneaky little incentives baked into their rate tables. So we're also like going over those and saying, okay, does FedEx want us to split this up or consolidate it into a box? And so you can really kind of go down the rabbit hole into stuff that a human-led packing operation would never be able to deal with, especially in a time crunch.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Fascinating. So all these different variables, the actual thing itself, if it is, if it's a unique thing like a battery that can't go in with foodstuffs, or it is a fragile item, or it's super heavy or whatever, and then you throw in the extra variable that each one of
Yeah,
these other companies
absolutely.
has some kind of a game that it's whatever, they're rewarding behaviors and penalizing others. And how often are you, is this something that you're constantly updating and constantly tweaking, or?
The sort of underlying tech itself, I mean, we kind of we're always kind of improving it and adding more features for different use cases. But the kind of underlying core has stayed pretty stable. And so what it's kind of allowed us to do is build applications on top of it that don't require integrations and things like that. So we just released something we call Pack Simulate, which you just upload a spreadsheet of the last few months of orders, for example, or shipments, and then it kind of runs on the engine and says, okay, these are actually the carton sizes you should buy. So it's a much more kind of like straightforward application to a fairly simple but common question. And that's kind of what we get excited about. What other ways can we leverage this technology that we've built to make certain tasks easier? And I would say, we're about 9 people now. We raised a seed round early this year. And I would say the team is extremely motivated by the sustainability implications of what we're doing. And those are kind of not something we even really thought about very much when Pat and I started the company. It was more once we finally got data, like one of our first big customers was Crate and Barrel. Being able to see the actual impact on acres of cardboard saved, like hundreds of truck trips saved from the distribution center. That's when we said, whoa, that this is actually kind of a special problem. It's a niche problem, but it's special because your costs and your emissions are basically the same. Anything regarding parcel shipping, if you're a shipper, you're basically paying to pollute in some way. So any kind of even incremental improvements you can make there, it's really just kind of a win-win.
Yeah, that is an awesome sort of secondary benefit to all of this. That was something I was curious about, is what kinds of monetary savings are possible or have you seen?
Yeah, the average tends to be around 15%.
Wow.
If you already have kind of a, super advanced 3D cartonization system, the floor tends to be around 6 or 7%, which doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, but to, large retailer, it is actually quite a bit. It's a few $1,000,000 usually. And so that's just on the transportation savings. The cardboard, which I think everybody kind of took for granted, has just become, it spiked all-time high like really fast during the pandemic and hasn't really come down that much. And it's not like price gouging or anything. Like everything that goes into making the cardboard boxes that show up on your doorstep, like the resin inside them has gotten a lot more expensive due to supply chain issues and all these things. So suddenly we will have companies coming to us just looking for that, not really even thinking about the transportation necessarily. They're just like, this stuff that we used to just throw away, this is just the cost of doing business. Now it's, well, wait a second, it's kind of eroding our margins by itself. So we typically, when we engage with a shipper retailer, we'll try to get a handle first on what's important to them, and kind of highlight that in whatever initial analysis engagement we do for them.
That makes sense. And I mean, I'm sure that you'd love to have Amazon as a customer, and perhaps you do, or perhaps you will. What is on the smaller or the lower end of that scale?
Like small customer wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of our first customers that we hold near and dear to our hearts is Lionel Trains. If you ever played with model trains as a kid, they've been
Sure.
around for 100 years. Incredibly forward-thinking for a company that old. And their use case was kind of simple, but fairly common, which is, as you might imagine, more people buy model trains for Christmas than they do for in the summer. So heavily kind of seasonal operation, seasonal workforce. So there's no, expertise really in the warehouse on how to package these things in a way where they won't get damaged or have a customer complain about a massive box with a tiny accessory rattling around in it. So it was, kind of super straightforward, kind of easy to prove that we could make that not a problem anymore. Just kind of put some complexity in the way that they fulfilled these, put some consistency rather in the way they fulfill these things. And they've been a great partner ever since.
Got it. But for somebody and for somebody who's listening and they're thinking, well, maybe I'm too small to be thinking about this kind of thing.
I see. Yeah, I mean, our kind of lowest tier pricing is around $100 a month. So at that rate, it's worth it if you ship 1 or 2 thousand packages a month. You should at least save a few $100s on shipping. Any smaller than that, and typically you have the time to kind of look at these things. It's not a high pressure fulfillment kind of scenario.
Got it. As you What are your thoughts on Amazon? That's a huge question. What was sort of rattling around in my head is obviously they move a lot of different products all over the world, but now you can just bring an item to a drop-off location and just hand it to them without even packing it. What is the wisdom in that?
Well, I think, it's kind of impossible to, without being inside Amazon, to accurately assess what they're doing. And in some ways, they'll probably never be a customer of ours because they optimize for completely different things. So we optimize for, costs based on, public carriers like FedEx, UPS, DHL, regional carriers. Um, and all the costs that are common to every retailer besides Amazon. And Amazon optimizes for speed above all else. It's kind of central to their brand. And so, we have like, speed controls where some of our customers put a kind of cost to labor so that, our algorithm's not going to tell a packer to pick 20 boxes just because it might be slightly cheaper because there's a labor cost. But Amazon is completely different like they almost don't care about how much air is in the box, at least not as a foundational concern.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole not to get into the weeds on that, but back to the conversation about sustainability and efficiency. My goodness, the amount of waste that must take place when you are putting a small item in a box and all those balloons that kind of show up inside. But anyway,
Yeah, no, it's brutal. I mean, there's what I often say, because we get asked this question a lot about Amazon, because that's everybody's frame of reference for poor packing, which in itself is probably not a good sign for them. But, what I usually say is there are, I'm sure, plenty of excellent reasons, operational and well thought out reasons that they ship this way. I just don't care. I think it's terrible. And I think that they're going to be in trouble when Scope 3 emissions reporting comes down and suddenly, we find that they're using, 30% more trucks than they need to, or maybe even more. Because these things scale really one to one. So if we can shrink the average size of a carton in a operation by 15%, a company's going to use 15% fewer trucks from that location over time.
mm,
So, I mean, speed speed is important. It's what you care about when you shop at Amazon. I'm not hoping for something to show up in 3 weeks. I want it tomorrow or today. But I think, once consumers get some more insight into the impact that has, where we can't pretend or we can't ignore that this decision to ship fast is polluting. I think there might be an interesting reckoning to be had there.
yeah, that should be interesting. That'll be it right there. Like, do I really want to put my money where my mouth is
Well, exactly.
and say, do I care more about the earth than I do the pure convenience of getting what I want when I want
Right.
it?
Right. Well, to Amazon's credit, they have done experiments where they offer slower shipping, because
Mm,
slower is always more sustainable, like pretty much in 100% of cases. Um, but they didn't get a lot of traction.
right.
And I think, maybe there are other opportunities to explain what that meant in line when you're checking out. But I thought it was, looking at it at the time, I thought it was clear enough. But when you're, like I said, when you're at Amazon.com, you're not like, oh, I need to, like, I need this toothpaste right now. Like I'm not trying to, schedule something for weeks away. But I don't want other retailers to take that as a sign that they shouldn't do it. Because when I'm shopping on a different website, I might not have that same kind of urgency. I might be more willing to kind of like share the pain of a more sustainable e-commerce experience by waiting longer.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You referenced a level 3 or something like that, talking about the
Scope 3?
scope 3.
Yeah.
I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that. I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening will be curious about that too, because I've never heard that term before.
I can give a quick primer.
Yeah, great.
The so there in terms of carbon emissions, there's sort of several classifications. There's scope 1 and scope 2, which are typically the emissions that come within your four walls. So anything that you're creating and releasing into the atmosphere. Scope 3 is anything that you cause to happen outside of your four walls. It could be the material that you buy, or it could be the FedEx trucks that you cause to hit the road. So cardboard and those trailers, those trucks, they would fall under a shipper's scope 3 emissions, even if those trucks are scope 1 or 2 for FedEx.
Excellent.
And so the big thing that everybody's panicking about is in Europe, scope 3 reporting, which is almost out of sight, out of mind for a lot of American companies. It's been the law of the land in Europe for a while now
Hmm.
to report on those things, but that's coming here. And so you're starting to see some corporate entities scramble a little bit to figure out what that means for them.
Stay tuned on that one. I love it. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about you and how can they engage with Paccurate?
Sure. Yeah. So I spend most of my time, well, not most of my time. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn kind of talking about these issues. So you can find me on there. Um, you could also go to paccurate.io. And if you're technical, you can sign up for a API key and start playing with it in 30 seconds. It's pretty fun. Yeah, that's all.
Love it. Well, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, show James your appreciation and share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Certainly, anybody you know that is shipping at least 1,000 things a month, opportunity to save money and be a little bit more sustainable. Go to paccurate.io. That's paccurate.io, and then find James Malley on LinkedIn. I'll list all those in the notes of the show. Thanks again, James.
Thanks, George.
And until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.